Thank you all for attending this webinar, the second in a series of webinars where we're providing our audience with an update on the legal cases that FAIR is supporting. I'm Leanne O'Neill. I'm the Managing Director of Legal Advocacy at FAIR. And Monica was meant to be hosting and moderating this webinar, but unfortunately something has come up family related that she's unable to attend. So, but I'm happy to be here with all of you today, and especially happy to be here with two of my all-time faves, Zack De Piero and Michael Allen. Zack is the very brave and courageous plaintiff of a very important lawsuit against his former employer, Penn State University. Some of you might have read about a recent small victory that we're very excited about, and we'll hear more about later. Zack filed suit against Penn State last summer with the great help of Mike Allen, who is one of our network attorneys and has worked on other cases with FAIR also. We're very lucky to be involved in supporting this important case. And first, I just want to give a little bit of background on each Zack and Mike, and then we'll kind of dive into the background on what happened with Zack, and he can give us his insights. So Zack has been teaching since 2009 he started teaching in the Philadelphia School District. Currently, he's an assistant professor of English at Northampton Community College. So of course, previously he was teaching at Penn State University, and he was forced out of that position after having to sustain a hostile work environment there. And he'll give us a lot of the very unfortunate details of what he experienced there. And we'll get to hear the insights about how that has led to the complaint that was filed last summer and the lawsuit that has been taking course since then. Zack has a long, amazing bio that would just take days for us to get into. So I'm going to rather let him reflect on anything crucial to his background that he feels is really important to this conversation, and, you know, save a lot of the time for hearing the specific insights he has to offer about what he experienced. And of course, we're going to get around to answering questions also. Like I said about Mike, he is one of our network attorneys. His law firm is Allen Harris. His law partner is Samantha Harris. They together take on extraordinary cases. I can tell you from personal experience that it is very difficult to find attorneys who will touch the stuff, as we say, on this side of the spectrum in terms of legal cases that come up. Many of you who are attending tonight are probably aware that students and professors alike face extraordinary civil rights violations on campus all the time. And when it comes to sort of the latest flavor of intolerant orthodoxies that present themselves on college campuses, the crowd of attorneys who are willing to stand up against those is very, very small. And we're very lucky to have Mike working alongside us in some of these cases. So we very much appreciate his zeal for the matters at hand today. So I just wanted to start by letting both Zack and Mike introduce themselves a little bit further and kind of give their perspective on what has happened. That could be a very long introduction, so we'll try to keep it a little bit succinct. And I would love to start with you, Zack. Tell us about, why did you get into teaching in the first place? And, once you found yourself at Penn State and experiencing what you did, what was your reaction? Could you really wrap your brain around what had begun to go on the college campuses?
Sure. First, I'm honored and grateful to have FAIR support here. Yeah, I really, really am. Same goes for the Allen Harris firm, Mike Allen. Honored and grateful to have you on my side and for your legal representation. Teaching's fun. I mean, it's supposed to be fun. That doesn't mean it's not supposed to be hard work, but it's supposed to be fun. The classroom environment should be one where students feel like they can be themselves, where they're treated as individuals, where they're sort of ideally finding themselves through the curriculum in some kind of way, especially in the writing classroom. You've got some flexibility in how you help students achieve these goals of working through the writing process, revising, editing, rinse, repeat. So I like it. I think writing's interesting. Language is interesting. It's empowering. It's important. Those are all reasons why I got into teaching in the first place. With specific respect to Penn State and all this. So let me start by saying I come at this from an education background. Education is a social science discipline. We work with empirical data, surveys, interviews, documents, and texts. We're interested in people's thoughts, feelings, attitudes, and why. The human dynamic, which can be a very complex thing. That's why it's interesting. So I brought that to Penn State in 2018. I worked at Penn State Abington. Abington is half an hour north of Center City, Philly. I worked there from 2018 to 2022. I could say that, kind of right from the jump, that I noticed like identity politics was a thing, that I was seeing folks, I was hearing what they were saying, what they're writing, and they tended to simplify in a very problematic way matters, of race, gender, sex, sexual orientation. They weren't just interested in this stuff. They tended to use those demographic boxes as causal variables to explain what you might see as matters of a lack of distribution or oppression or something like that. And so, like, you'd see these incidents, but these things are one-offs until they're not. And I would say the pattern really took hold in the summer of 2020, where I hate to have any of us go back to that summer. It was brutal for everybody, but you're talking about a pressure cooker. COVID had been in the ether for a few months. Schools had been shut down. Businesses had been shut down. You had George Floyd's murder and Black Lives Matter protests. You had an uptick in violence in many of the urban areas in the country. You had an upcoming political election, Trump, Biden. Like, it felt like the world was going to burst, didn't it?
It was a special time in history. Yeah,
it was brutal. It was awful. The radical activists at Penn State, like, seized that moment, and instead of just being interested in identity politics, they started to weaponize it. And it was almost like they drew a line in the sand, like a battle line. You might as well call that like the anti-racist divide. And you were either with them, all in, no questions asked, no equivocations, the philosophies, the practices, the propaganda. And think about it. If you're not on the anti-racist side, according to these language games that they play, where are you left? You're left on the racist side, which is totally absurd and unfair. But it definitely plays into what you hear folks like Ibram X. Kendi say when he says there's no such thing as not racist. There's just anti-racist or racist. And it became clear to me after the onslaught of messaging, and I'll wrap this up in a minute here. You had white teachers are a problem videos, white instructors confront their white privilege workshops. You had the DEI director emailing the whole campus and telling us that we had internalized white supremacy. We needed to hold other white people accountable. We needed to stop talking. I mean, all this stuff is in writing. An affirmative action office director told me that there's a problem with the white race. And I needed to keep going to these anti-racist workshops until I get it. And Leanne, what I was doing was what I was asked to do. You've got these state mandated compliance reports. If you see something, say something, report bias. And it kind of has this very like Orwellian feel on campus when you're getting it. Obviously, it serves a very important role. And what I did was I reported bias, and that came back to bite me real hard. And bullying and harassment charges were filed against me. HR had me sign these reprimands. I passed along my reports to them. They said, that's on you. We're resolving this here right now. It wound up on my performance review. And, so it's very clear that my civil rights were violated. Other faculty, students, and staff's civil rights were violated. But as importantly for me, a teacher, I'm seeing this environment take hold where like hard work is somehow demonized, and giving students your best approximation of their performance and you wanting to hold them accountable so that they can be their best versions of themselves. It's my job to get the most out of students. It's not very complicated, but I can't do that when I'm getting messages like assure that students see that white supremacy manifests itself in the teaching of writing, and racism exists in the results if the results draw a color line. So for all these reasons, I can't just sit there and swallow it, and be their good soldier or whatever. It's what they did was wrong and it's illegal, and enough is enough.
Mm-hmm. So, and maybe Mike, you can chime on this too, with kind of your perspective in terms of the actual filing of the lawsuit. But I mean, Zack, when did you know it was time to do something about this? Like, how did that process play out for you? Had conversations with Penn State where you were trying to kind of make headway there? I mean, you obviously filed the complaints through their systems on your own. What was the moment where you knew, okay, this has to go to the next level?
I've thought about that. It almost happened like every week. Something else would happen and something else would happen. You've got this internal conscience, this regulator, your instincts. You don't need a PhD or a JD or an MBA or any kind of degree to know what's right and what isn't right. And it was very clear, very obvious what they were doing was wrong. I tried to resolve it internally. I brought it up. You've got these steps on the organizational structure ladder, your department, your division, HR, I made my division soup aware of what had been happening at one point, and I thought that would be it. She would take care of it. Enough is enough. Stop the, she was shocked when with the white teachers are a problem thing, to my recollection, when I told her that. Summer, you go back to for the next semester, and then all of a sudden you've got come join us, they're mandatory. The myth of the colorblind writing classroom. White instructors confront their white privilege. And I think that was the moment, Leanne, I filed my internal bias report that got sent to the affirmative action office, which set off a whole other chain of disasters here.
And so, Mike, let's go over to you for a minute. I mean, what do you recall about hearing about Zack's case originally that sort of, made this something that you wanted to be a part of? And how has it, what's been your perspective on the case so far?
Well, I'm trying to remember when Zach first came to us, and I think it was because of our collaboration with FAIR that we learned about Zach. So there was that. And I think FAIR does a good job of spreading its net widely to find, we've got, I'm just one attorney that works along with FAIR, but we've got a case out in California and this one in Pennsylvania, and I know you have others as well. So there's really a quite extraordinary reach that FAIR has been able in a short period of time to establish. And I think one of the things that makes a case like this, I guess if you want to say attractive to me, as a former academic and now as an attorney who finds it very gratifying to sue universities after having worked in them for half a career, is that, I think these are the kind of cases where we don't have to get involved in some of the thorny issues that are so widely debated in our popular culture. We don't have to get ourselves bogged down in definitions of what it means to be woke or anti-woke, or as I guess Jesse Singal says, we don't have to become anti-woke weirdos or something. Not even knowing what that means. We don't have to get involved in discussions of critical race theory or essentialism or determinism, because it's actually quite simple, it seems to me, that Zach was standing up for what I think we used to think of traditionally as civil rights, or something defined as common to all of us. And in his teaching, I believe he was trying to strive for methods of instruction, and having been experienced in inner city schools for many, many years, it wasn't as if they could place him in a box in which he was a stereotypical, alt-right weirdo himself. He was actually in the trenches teaching these people and trying to do a good job teaching universal principles of prose style, the English language. There is no specific English language that belongs to anyone because of the color of their skin. And I thought he was teaching from that perspective. And so that's kind of what made it, attractive to us as a firm. I thought there was a potential, like in the Tavia Lee case, which has gotten quite a bit of attention. There was a way in which the degrading stereotypes being peddled, at least as I saw them and the evidence provided to me, were recycling stereotypes of the 19th century, which real racists had espoused, but had slapped an anti-racist label on it, and now basically put a big smiley face on all the things that the truly ugly racists of the 19th century had put a frowny face on to make it trivial or something. But so that's kind of what interested me, is how really the most obnoxious ideas of 19th century true racists, true colonialists, were being recycled as somehow liberating, as long as you just said anti-racist or something like that. Now, with the opinion, and I see opposing counsels in the audience. So, we have very smart, very capable attorneys on the other side, and they're defending their client. It's not as if there aren't real issues at stake in education that they are defending as well. And I really thought Judge Beetlestone's opinion struck a good balance, especially with regard to the what's called under Title VII or similar anti-discrimination statutes, hostile environment theory of the case. In other words, she says, quite rightly, I think, and I don't think any of my clients, and certainly not Zach, would say otherwise, that there should be an open debate on campus, especially in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. These ideas, these concepts, grappling with a national conversation on race, as it was touted at Penn State, was on everyone's lips and everyone's mind. But that doesn't mean that you can impose, as a state institution, an orthodoxy, a stultifying conformity of thought, and especially, most obnoxiously, impose a kind of pedagogy based on race, so that people are graded differently on the basis of their skin rather than on their achievements. I think one thing that's really overlooked is how harmful that is to the very people that are supposed to be benefited by it. You know, how does that help struggling first generation college students of color, be they Black, Hispanic, whatever, Asian, who need to distinguish themselves and need to learn the skills that they will take into the job force or whatever, wherever they go? How does it help them to just be, be plopped in front of a teacher who's been turned into Ned Flanders in The Simpsons and just smacks a gold star in their forehead? I don't really understand what that does for anyone. And it is degrading. It is degrading on the basis of race, most certainly. And what she said, yes, these things must be debated. Training concepts, I'm just reading from the opinion, such as white privilege, white fragility, implicit bias, or critical race theory can contribute positively to nuanced, important conversations about how to form a healthy and inclusive working environment. This is particularly so in an educational institution, which, cases like Garcetti and others issued by the Supreme Court have carved out as a special realm for free thought and free expression in American life. And I think Beetlestone is echoing that without engaging some of those cases. But she says, placing this added emphasis on these issues in the aftermath of the very real instances of racialized violence, like the murder of George Floyd, does not violate Title VII. And I don't think, excuse me, I have a cold. Title VII being the federal statute, part of the Civil Rights Act, that forbids discrimination on the basis of race and a few other protected categories. And then she went on in the decision, but the way these conversations are carried out in the workplace matters. When employers talk about race, any race, with a constant drumbeat of essentialist, deterministic, and negative language, they risk liability under federal law. And I think really that gets it right. That's an assertion of universalist principles in our law, really back to the principles of the founding of our republic, that we have to defend.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point. I mean, and I kind of wanted to back up a minute just to give everyone who's watching, kind of specific background on what was in terms of the discrimination claim in the original complaint. And if you could just give kind of a quick, little overview of what Title VII is meant to protect against, what was alleged in the complaint originally, and then how does what came out last week, how does that inform the case going forward?
So there were many claims, and again, opposing counsel did their job well. So there were many claims that were dismissed, including, to my frustration, a First Amendment claim, which I thought was on a peculiar ground, which was that in particular, Zack had spoken up at a faculty meeting in opposition to some of these essentialist, deterministic concepts that were being imposed on the faculty with the full force of a state institution. And that was considered by the judge not to be speaking on a matter of public concern. So that one was also dismissed. The First Amendment, I don't think we really need to go into that. I think members of your audience will be well acquainted with it. You asked specifically about Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. That protects people in employment, in the employment context, regardless of whether they're state institutions or not, from discrimination on the basis of race, religion, national origins, I believe, and sex. Sorry. I don't know if I will be forgetting some categories there, but in this particular case, it was on the basis of race because white people were being vilified for no other reason that they were having white skin that was essentially supposed to be a badge and incident of racism or something.
One of the
That's
things
what
that
the judge meant by essentialism, I believe. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, just to jump in on that point really quickly. One of the things that has been striking to me during the time I've worked at FAIR is there seems to be a common understanding of anti-discrimination laws, an incorrect understanding that they somehow don't apply to everybody. Right. I mean, has that been surprising to you in your career as a lawyer so far doing this work?
I mean, everyone I think can recognize where that misunderstanding comes from, but that's never been part of the law. The law is very clear that it's discrimination on the basis of race. There have been going back many decades, there have been cases of what's colloquially called reverse discrimination or whatnot. Just as there have been cases of reverse sexism where men are targeted in the workforce. So based on universal principles of equality, those are no-nos, right, under our law. I think obviously the misconception comes from the real premise that historically a lot of certain people haven't had enough power to discriminate against other people. They weren't the bosses. They were uniformly the employees being harassed or whatnot. But I don't think it takes much imagination to do a simple thought experiment. If we had a workplace at Penn State or elsewhere where everyone was being harangued because of Black privilege or Black fragility was supposed to be an innate, inherent concept of the Black race, or any of the other sort of malarkey, silly things that are being said and spread on campus in the name of various fashionable theories, no one in their right mind would fail to recognize that as a hostile environment of racial discrimination. No more or less so than if we turned back the clock to the era of Bull Connor, and I'm sure there were all kinds of racist jokes being bandied about the proverbial water cooler. No one would fail to recognize that as something that we don't want in American life. But yet, for some reason now, it's supposed to be a, quote, national conversation on race to bandy about these kind of shallow stereotypes, most of which, like I said before, just turn 19th century stereotypes on their head and begin, deriding things that 19th century racists thought were unique privileges and qualities of white people, like their ability to do math or write good sentences or think critically, be independent and on time, and none of which was ever true, all of which was malarkey. But now this malarkey is dressed up as somehow, quote, anti-racism, along with the doctrine, fashionable, especially in academia, that it is, somehow discrimination is the antidote to historical discrimination, which means basically let's get back at people we don't like and blame them for the wrongs of the historical past.
So one of the questions we have from someone in the audience that is, directly on point here right now with this exact conversation is, given sort of that anecdote that came in the opinion last week, where the judge said that when employers use a constant drumbeat of essentialist, deterministic, and negative language, employers can face federal employment discrimination liability there. Do you think, how do you see the importance of that sentence in that opinion? And do you think that the result will be additional cases like this? I mean, have you seen other case law that acknowledges that, to be perfectly blunt, a white person can experience a racially hostile environment at work?
Yes. When
they're having this type of rhetoric thrown at them in required meetings, week in and week out?
I mean, one can hope, right, that this will gradually create a body of law that discourages the kind of environment, especially in education, that Zack was facing at Penn State Abington. How deeply entrenched it is, I think, is very very clear in the sense that when we filed suit, there was some petition that circulated at Penn State that I think over 400 people signed on to, many of them Penn State faculty, administrators, staff. So these are really cherished, beloved ideas of many, many people, especially in academia, but not only in academia. In the you have to hope that it will create some momentum going the other way, right? But and let's be clear too, this is just at the motion to dismiss phase. Right. So that means now that we will have discovery in front of us, and we have to now prove our case. So this is by no means this is basically getting at the beginning, at the bottom of the staircase. We have to now climb up. each step by step.
I can say
Oh.
that, just anecdotally, really quickly in the work that I've done at FAIR, when we have conversations around potential lawsuits, we have people come to us all the time, every week
Yes.
with civil rights violations.
Yep.
And, I don't think that it's any mystery that taking on a lawsuit of this nature has been something that a lot of people would stay very clear of.
Yeah.
And not only because there are the inevitable social implications that come along with standing up for this type of principle and doing it in this way and with this set of facts, but also because it is sort of a unique new impression, right? When you're looking at it from a legal context and you're thinking about how convincing will this be? And of course, from a legal standpoint, as you've already pointed out, Mike, it doesn't matter. The law protects everyone on the basis of race. It doesn't matter which race you are. But, I think that it's an encouraging step for folks who are working in the space of equality and trying to prove out that equality is universal regardless of skin color, at least in America, thankfully. So I'm obviously very happy with what we learned last week. But yeah, and Zach, I want to go back to you. I mean, how, like Mike said, this is, the opinion that came out last week, it was just a decision on a motion to dismiss that Penn State had filed. How has that impressed upon you? What has it meant to you to see what came out last week?
It means the world. It's this is very important to me. This is not a game. This is not a stunt. This is the real world. I take teaching very seriously. You can have long hair and be yourself and play music in class and have cool projects and still take it seriously. And I do, and I always have, and I always will. What they have done is honest to God, they've created such an assault on good education, on teaching and on learning, to use Mike's previous comments about the weirdo thing. Like, they're trying to make kids weird. They're trying to teach them to hate each other and to think that to see other people in the room as in these hierarchies of oppression and victimization. And I don't think that's right. I mean, I know that's not right. But to have that validated in Judge Beetlestone's language, it's a 10 out of 10 level. I mean, it's 1,000 out of 10 level of importance to me. I want people to stand up for themselves and for others. Like, I understand that this is scary. I'm not gonna lie to anybody. That this was scary for me too. Like, you got to get over it, though. You have to get over that fear. You didn't do anything wrong. You know what I'm saying? Like, I didn't do anything wrong. Yet people are made to feel like they did something wrong because they're getting this nonstop brainwashing propaganda that's telling them that white people are somehow morally incompetent or culturally ignorant or something, which is crazy. So, listen, if this has any impact beyond me, because this is not about me, I'm happy to go down. I mean, like, when I did this, I was like, okay, I'm filing a report. Here goes this job, but not only the job, here goes your career. I'd have long conversations with my wife and my parents who both passed away this past summer about how, it's like, what are you supposed to do here? You're quiet, you're silent, you keep taking it, you keep taking it, you keep taking it. I'm going to keep saying it because they put it at you every week. You keep taking it, or you stand up for yourself and you push back, and in a calm and reasonable way, you should be able to ask questions about anything in life. The people pushing this are people. They're just people. Ibram X. Kendi, he's just a guy. He's a dude. Okay. And yet they're treated like these high priests that you have to bow down to. I don't think you should bow down to anybody, especially if they're trying to push you around like that and make you feel like crap. So full circle, I couldn't be happier with the opinion that, you know, Judge Beetleson saw this constant drumbeat of race-essentialism and discrimination, because that's exactly what it was.
That you know, you mentioned and we've talked about the constant drumbeat and that the sentence that she put in that opinion, and how that impacted you and your decision to stand up for yourself. Could you talk a little bit about how did you see effects on the students? And if you did, you know, did that help further motivate you to take this step?
I was teaching, that's a good question. It's a tough question too. I tried my best to like almost shield my students from all this absolute nonsense. Not in like they're fragile kind of way, but just in like I didn't want them to know about all this dirty laundry going on behind closed doors. I didn't want them to hate their own school. Penn State University is a proud institution. Like, I want them to thrive. I hope they improve what they're doing because of this, because they need to. Like, you grew up in Pennsylvania, you know, Saturday mornings, you see Penn State football games on the TV. I had that every week growing up. You throw a rock somewhere, you'll see Penn State stickers, sweatshirts. Like, they're ingrained in the culture of the state. And I'm sort of losing my thread here, but did I see students behaving any differently because of this? I guess I'd say that, you know, in some of my courses, like first year composition or writing for the social sciences, I like to let students write about a topic that interests them, you know, whenever possible. And, you know, I'd see an uptick in assignments and projects that took on issues of racial justice or of African-American vernacular English. And that's great. That's cool. Mm-hmm. Because, Leanne, in the classroom, instructors should remain agnostic, okay? Politically agnostic, and if possible, I think content agnostic, at least in the writing classroom specifically. Mm-hmm. So when students were interested in what's going on around them in the world, like, I think that's awesome. And I think you want to leverage that because that's an authentic interest that they have. But as far as students becoming radicalized or something, I don't have firsthand, you know, knowledge of that specifically.
Okay, got it. That makes sense.
I have plenty of secondhand knowledge of that happening. I have, you know, clients at much, you know, less prestigious universities than Penn State, Abington, being turned on by their students, things being made up about them. And the worst thing is, I think those people have always existed. But the worst thing is you have administrators, HR bureaucrats, whatever guys they come in, whether they're diversity, equity, and inclusion bureaucrats, Title IX bureaucrats, they are acting willfully ignorant of what is going on and acting as if they don't know what's going on. And a lot of these, this particular ideological moment almost requires us to pretend not to know what we so obviously know. And that is unfortunately happening, I would say, with disturbing frequency throughout the body of academic institutions in the United States.
If I could drop in
Yeah, go
one
ahead.
more quick point, we're on the topic of students. Since this lawsuit became public, I've heard from multiple students, Penn State students, and multiple Penn State current employees who say they've gone through similar situations as me, and they're terrified. They are scared to death to stand up for themselves and speak truth to power. So, like, that's very telling. That tells you what kind of hostile work environment was allowed to take hold, and just you had the people who I feel like laid the groundwork for this, and it doesn't seem like it's a coincidence that they've gotten promoted since this all happened, which adds a whole nother wrinkle of crazy to this.
So that leads me to another one of the questions I see here in our Q&A right now. And this has been a big topic of discussion that we have a lot in FAIR, around FAIR. Is there a way for traditional DEI work, or, if we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the originally intended terms, is there a way to do that work going forward that is productive, that, a lot of people have, noticed, especially very recently, that a lot of efforts toward diversity, equity, inclusion are not anti-discriminatory, they're preferential. And so then they therefore are discriminatory themselves. And that's along the line of what we said about, what you've mentioned about, for example, Kenny's book. Is it possible to do the DEI type work in a way that doesn't result in lawsuits like Zach's? I might ask Mike for his response to that question.
It's a good question. I mean, to plug another client, Tavia Lee, I think she has some good ideas about how to go about this in a sensible way that are based on universal principles, not racial essentialism. At her school, which was a De Anza community college out in California, not 10 miles from where I grew up, actually. They've got segregated faculty groups that have special rights and voting privileges, things like that. So I don't know. This just doesn't seem like a muscle that white people need to, exercise, segregation with special voting rights attached to it. But nevertheless, there we have it in the 21st century out in California. But to the contrary, Dr. Lee was promoting, universal principles as a window on diversity, equity, and inclusion that would truly mean what I think those words colloquially mean to most people: diversity in terms of valuing what is different about people, equity in terms of fairness, not in terms of equalization of outcomes, which is what its stealth definition has become, and inclusion, meaning its ordinary term that we include people, not what it, I think, has acquired as a stealth definition, exclusion. There are people like Chloe Valdery. I think there are also people in the theater trying to found new theaters that will espouse universal principles and get away from some theater as a kind of flat moral didactic exercise in propaganda. So I do see some green shoots, let's say. I don't know, that's probably not the best term, but I don't actually think it would be that difficult if, like Dr. Lee, you take as your beginning point that you want to start from universal first principles and apply them in a consistent way. I think that's what most people want. I actually think, to Zach's point, a lot of the people who are so passionately dedicated to this do mean well, and they are reacting to real inequalities in society. But you know, um, arsenic used to be a treatment for many diseases, but that doesn't make it a good idea, right? The diseases were real, but the cure was often deadlier than the disease.
Right. Zach, do you have any thoughts that you wanted to add for that question or that topic?
I mean, I have a ton. Mike, are you okay if I offer a few thoughts here?
Sure, go ahead.
So I think your initial question was, can DEI work in a not crazy way?
More or
Yeah.
less. Mhm.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I got to be really careful. I don't want to. I'm complimenting them. Okay. My current employer, Northampton Community College, goes about this like totally differently. The leader has an excellent temperament. She doesn't put you on the defensive. It seems like the goal is to bring people together. I'm someone who thinks that representation is important, in popular culture, in the media. Whenever you hear somebody say, I think it's important for people to see themselves in whatever it is, in leaders and superheroes and whatever the hell. Yeah, I think that's a great thing. I think that's a laudable goal. What's important to remember, though, I think, is like DEI is just a concept. This is an abstract concept. Like it sounds nice and happy. And how could you possibly be against that? Well, it's like think of the word critical thinking, the phrase critical thinking. Who would be against critical thinking? It's an abstract concept. What do you mean by that? What does it look like? If critical thinking manifests itself in students just parroting some particular political orientation, not sussing out claims, not requiring evidence, not considering other viewpoints, to me, that's not critical thinking. So I wouldn't endorse that concept. So, so what I'm trying to say is, like any concept, I think DEI ultimately depends on how it plays out on the ground, what it looks like, what it sounds like, and what it feels like to the employees working in that environment. And that's such a hard reality to gauge, again, because people have been made to feel so shamed, so degraded, and so terrified to voice their actual thoughts and feelings about this stuff. I wrote a piece in the New York Post a couple of weeks ago about DEI statements, and which is, along with your resume, cover letter, and references, which is like this new piece of the puzzle that's required to apply for academic jobs. And I do feel like that is a form of compelled speech, because DEI has tended to manifest in such a political way, not always, but in many cases, and especially at Penn State. So, like a lot of these ideas, they're tricky. They're subject to debate. They should be subject to debate, because that's how the best ideas emerge. It's from being sussed out, from being vetted, and from being argued.
And, part of your answer there, Zach, was just about the feeling of shame and, the hesitancy then to express even different ideas, let alone to step forward like you have when you know that something has been done wrong. And that kind of goes to one of the other questions that we've received is, and Mike, you might have insights that are helpful on this, and I'm curious to hear your perspective, but for folks who feel like they're experiencing a civil rights violation, but are, terrified of the retribution that might come with speaking up or attempting to defend themselves, what are the mechanisms that are available to folks? Short of paging through the phone book. The phone book? What year is this? Who has a phone book? Looking for a lawyer who might, take up your case.
Well, I'm going to say something about this, because I think it's a very, very difficult for people in Zach's position to do anything. And it's very structural. You know, many of my clients don't make more than $50,000 to $70,000 a year. They don't have the means to save the kind of money that it would take to fight a lawsuit. Their employers have very deep resources and are often insured against lawsuits, so that they're playing with house money, let alone if you're litigating against the state, in which in some states it's simply turned over to the state AG's office and they really are playing with house money. No matter how unpopular, and they are very unpopular, academic institutions become with the public at large, they'll still take your tax money and fight a lawsuit to defend you know, frivolous action taken against professors. So it's very, very difficult, because also precisely for the same reason, the damages are usually not that tremendous, you know. Not untypical settlement in a wages and employment dispute would be a multiple of years earnings, right? But you know, a lawsuit at full legal fees is extremely expensive, and a couple of years salary, even though it's real money to these people, you know, a couple of years salary of someone who might make $60,000 a year and teaches music theory or something, is less than litigation costs. And on top of that,
That's
on top of that, I think Zach is in a peculiar area where, you know, there's always a demand, especially at community colleges, places like Penn State, Abington, places that are teaching first-generation college goers to teach basic composition. Some of my clients don't teach things that are very practical, don't teach things with any practical application, and can only exist in academia. So when they lose their job over something like the purity of thought that is required sometimes by the DEI bureaucracies of the world, they will never work again in that area. They will never be doing what they were doing. They have to switch careers. It's not that they become homeless, so don't get me wrong, but to be canceled on campus for them is a very real prospect. And I don't blame many of them for just staying quiet, trying to grin and bear it. But you have to understand, the vast majority of our clients are people who have thought of themselves their whole life long as good, upstanding members of the left, until they get attacked by their own colleagues. Usually their own colleagues and friends come for them, aided and abetted by the campus, you know, thought police. And it is very difficult to do, Leanne, without the support of institutions like FAIR. And FAIR is not the only institution, but it is, I think, unique in the way it goes about things.
May I chime in with a comment here?
Absolutely, please.
Okay, so Penn State is a financial Goliath. The football coach makes $7 million a year. Penn State's legal fees, legal budget from this site, Spotlight Pennsylvania, is a nonpartisan independent website. They've got an $11.5 million annual legal budget, 26 people working in the Office of General Counsel, and they work with 5 private firms. Okay, that's what we're up against here. So, my monthly salary, excuse me, my annual salary at Penn State in 2018 was just about 50 grand. They were so generous to bump that up to 52 4 years later. So I ended at 52 grand, you know, after taxes. That's what like $38,000 or something. You know what I'm saying? I took on summer school too to supplement my income. So let's just say after taxes, working at Penn State, fall, spring, and summer, I'm making, you know, $42,000 or something. How the hell am I going to take on Penn State with an $11.5 million annual budget for its lawsuits? All that is to say, you wouldn't be hearing me talk right now. You wouldn't be in this webinar if it weren't for FAIR and speaking with Leanne when I first met her a couple years ago. She took me seriously. She listened. She followed through. She cared. She realized this was a huge problem. So what I want to say is, like, if you think this is a problem, what we've covered, what I've talked about, what FAIR stands for, what the Allen Harris law firm is fighting for, you've got to do something about it, okay? If you're too afraid to speak out in your own lives or on your own terms, I sort of respectfully disagree with Mike when he says he understands it. I speak up, okay? That's my position. But please consider donating something to FAIR so that they can continue to fund not just this case, but Professor Tabia Lee's case and cases that are coming up down the pike. I'm not in this to make money or something like that. I'm just a normal guy who wants to teach writing, get the most out of my students, come home, have a nice dinner with my wife, have fun with my daughter, and do the same freaking thing the next day. Okay. Penn State made it very, very, very difficult for me to do that. And this is going to keep happening unless there's sort of like this crowdsourced support for what we're trying to do here. And thank you. Thank you for considering.
I don't think I could make a better appeal than that one. Thank you, Zach. And what Zach said is true. There are so many folks who face injustices and violations. And if there aren't organizations that can help fund litigation in order to prove those institutions wrong, we will continue seeing the same problems repeat themselves over and over again. We know that. And that is, what we are here to do. And that's only possible with the help of individual donors who, make generous contributions to our organization. And I know the link to our donate button is posted in the chat. If you feel so inclined to support the work that we do, that will help fund, Zach's ongoing case as well as others. And, not to mention just keeping the wheels turning in organizations like FAIR that make advocacy work of all different kinds possible. We really, really appreciate the generosity of our donors. So thank you. And thank you to Zach and Mike for being here with us this evening. We are very, very lucky to have you share your time with us. And thank you to all of our attendees for being here tonight. Please share. You'll get a link followed up to the recording of the webinar tomorrow. Please share with friends, anyone you think might be interested. That's another great way to help get FAIR's message out and to help support cases like Zach's. So thank you all very much for being here this evening. We really appreciate it. Have a great rest of the evening.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks again, Leanne.